Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for making this, well, in some cases anyway, your first session of the morning on what I think is usually a fairly rigorous schedule here in Davos. I'm Charles Hodson. I present a program called World Business Today on CNN International, and I therefore have quite a few contacts with people in the business world, but never quite so many all in one place as I have this morning. So allow me first of all to introduce our distinguished panel. And I think you have all presumably read the blurb about this, so you know who everyone is. But just to introduce everyone, Michael White of PepsiCo, Michael Dell of Dell, Shelly Lazarus of O&M, and Doug Holt of the Saïd Business School in Oxford. I think let's get straight into it. I mean, just to run through the bullet points. I'm sure you've read all this. If you haven't, then you made a wrong decision to come here. But we're delighted to have you all the same. Here we go. Is a one-size-fits-all global brand strategy workable? Is there a difference between entering a developed market and entering an emerging market? Are multinational companies likely to achieve greater success if they work with local ones to build their brand? What are the differences between building a brand today by comparison with a decade ago, and what will the challenges look like 10 years from now? So let's look back 10 years and look forward 10 years. And I'm going to start, those are the big ideas. I'd rather start with some of the kind of more concrete examples from those who have developed brands, who have the responsibility of using those brands to drive revenues and profits for their shareholders. So let me start. I think what we're going to, for our opening comments, I'm going to start literally from the left as you, ladies and gentlemen, are looking and move to the right. So if I can start with you, Michael White. Tell us what is your approach to branding? How at PepsiCo have you approached this particular problem?
Well, I think every industry probably is a little bit different, and even within our company, we have really kind of two different approaches. One around brand Pepsi and our carbonated soft drink business, which tends to be a bit more global, although with technology increasingly able to customize locally, to our snacks business, chips business, Lay's, Walker's in the UK, Smith's in other countries, where we tend to be probably more local with kind of some elements of global that go with it. And I think in the food and beverage industry, there's nothing more cultural than eating. So for us, we've had to find a hybrid that is really somewhere in the middle. In terms of brand Pepsi, we've obviously got a consistent imagery, consistent positioning for the brand. It means the same thing to consumers globally. In fact, we use the phrase that it's a tight frame on a white canvas. So we try and keep pretty clear with everybody the guidelines around both the look, the brand logo, as well as the positioning. In the case of brand Pepsi, probably 50% of the media that we run is global media, and about 50% are local executions, so it's a balance. On the snack side, similarly, we've got consistent product specifications. We've got a consistent look for our Lay's brand. Even Lay's and Walker's actually have the exact same look on the package. But what we do a lot more of is tailoring. So in the UK, cheese and onion crisps is the most popular. In China, it might be Hangzhou stew meat, or we have a cool lemon Lay's. In Thailand, it's seaweed Lay's. That's the #1. In Germany, it's paprika. And eating habits and tastes are quite different, so we will tailor the product to appeal to consumers. And then from an advertising standpoint, we usually have kind of a consistent story that we'll build around Bet You Can't Eat Just One. But the way it gets tailored is slightly different from country to country, from Gary Lineker in the UK to very different approaches in countries like China, South Africa, or India.
Michael Dell, again, so you have one of the best-known brands, but with a huge panoply of different products. How do you use that brand to drive your profits?
We think it is possible to have a global brand, but we think there's a difference between a global brand and a global brand strategy. As we've expanded around the world, we found some fairly distinctive differences in cultures and other preferences that have caused us to really tailor what we do to the local market. So, an example would be when we first went to China, the whole concept of direct sales could also be kind of translated into something equating to like a pyramid scheme, okay, which wasn't a particularly good position for us to be in as a company. In fact, there were laws that were being put in place to sort of prevent pyramid schemes, and so we had to go out of our way to explain what the real message and what the real value of our offering was and the real value of the brand. In Germany, we found when we started that direct was a little bit of a new concept, at least for consumers. For businesses, they were very comfortable with that. Consumers actually were hesitant to call us on the telephone. This is in the pre-internet days, so we didn't have that. But they would actually be very willing to send us a fax. And so we had to translate what direct meant into the German culture, into the German psyche. But what we found is that there are some sort of universal truths in economics and value and quality and product integrity that really resonate with people all over the world, and that's how we've really built our brand.
Can I ask you just an interesting question? You would say this is what happened before the days of the internet, but now in the days of the internet, where essentially if I want a Dell computer, or if my business wants a Dell computer, we get online, we specify what we want, we pay for it, we get a delivery date, we take delivery, and off we go. Now, how has that changed from the days when business was done over the telephone or by fax in Germany?
Well, it's really been a fantastic accelerator for us. I mean, we had last year, 1.4 billion times people did exactly what you said. Not all of them ordered, but they went to their computers and typed www.dell.something and saw our product, got information on our product, purchased our product, or saw the information and then called us. So it is an enormous accelerator. And of course, being in the computer industry, it was a fairly obvious step for us, and being a direct company, so it was just a fantastic.
But does it change your branding approach?
It changes it in the sense that we completely embrace the internet as the best way to provide information to our customers. So as customers came online, it wasn't just about selling the product. It was about explaining all the benefits, all the values, all the things that the product and the services embody, and doing that in a really rich and immersive way. Because while we might have a face-to-face contact with a customer, we don't have stores. Our store is in someone's mind. It's an imagination of what they're going to get. The other powerful thing that we have is, because we are building each product to order, the customer has a unique identification, an emotional identification with the product that they would not get if they were buying it off the shelf. So there's this sort of connection of, you're building this exactly for me. Well, that's very special.
Shelly, Lazarus, listening to all of this, what do you make of it? They know what they're doing, these guys, don't they?
They certainly do. The one truth I can tell you is, because we work across so many brands and so many places, is there is definitely not a one-size-fits-all formula. Life would be very easy, although less interesting, if there were. And you sort of smile about that, but I can remember back, I'm old enough to remember back 15 years ago when having a global brand meant that you did the advertising in the United States or the UK, and you would then ship the tapes out to every country and just tell them to translate it. It was really easy. It didn't work very well, but the model was easy.
Some people, though. It still works for some people.
Very few people do that anymore, I think, because one of the things that happens in experience is that then the local countries, aside from the fact that you're never going to get the best solution, the other problem you have is that the people in the country who are the recipients of these orders from headquarters spend all their emotional energy proving to you that this will not work in my country. And so you've lost before you even started. I mean, you don't have a chance. But what we have learned, and both Michael and Michael referred to it, is that the thing you have to do is figure out what that core, the core truths are about a brand. What are those very few things, by the way, that are universal? And once you can define that, you then send that out to every geography and say, please take that core and figure out how to make it as potent and powerful as it can possibly be in your particular geography. And so you engage everybody intellectually, you engage them emotionally. I have a creative partner who always says, give me the freedom of a tight strategy. You know, so that once you can define the core very tightly, you can then free people in every geography to express those universals in the way that's appropriate for that geography. And that, I think, if there's any overview of sort of how to think about global brands going local, it's that.
Well, I think that's, Michael had a phrase for that. What was it? A tight canvas with a, sorry, a tightly stretched canvas.
With a white canvas, yes, which is a wonderful way to express it, I think. It's, but you have to, you sort of have to be clear about what the frame is. And then you also have to be clear about whether you are going to do anything about violations, because that's the other thing, is sort of, you know, you sort of go out and you hope for the best. And now what are you going to do when somebody in a country violates the brand?
Oh, well, we didn't know that this was going to be a session on internal company discipline, did we? But it seems it has become one. Well,
but with a you know, I don't think a company has a more precious asset than its brand. I mean, you're playing with all the marbles when you mess with the brand, and I think it's important that everybody who deals with a brand, sort of anywhere in the world, understands that it's a huge responsibility. And in our global world now, anything that anybody does anywhere affects everybody everywhere. So you have to really be vigilant, because everybody will know.
Doug Holt, Saïd Business School, what do you make of all of this?
Let me try and take the academic view, should be the provocative one, I suppose. So let me throw some provocations back to the panel. I've done studies sort of at both ends of the continuum. I've done a lot of work looking at brands that have done a very good job at developing extraordinarily culturally specific symbolism and done very well at that. And also I've done some work looking at how global brands actually use their globalness as a point of difference. And I would argue actually some of the examples that are being offered here are, I think, good examples of what has been sort of the paradigm, the post-paradigm of what Shelly's talking about. What once upon a time, standardization from the West was sort of the way. And I think over the last 20 years, adaptation, some globalization of some sort has been more typical, more conventional. What I would argue is that the world is now separating into sort of two brand strategies, let's say, at a global level. One is to base your proposition on the globalness of the brand. And part of that would be what Michael Dell said, that just the pure sort of economic proposition based on the reliability of the product, the technological sophistication of the product. When you succeed in big global markets, when you succeed in the US and Europe, that has extraordinary cachet around the world and actually does the brand a lot of good. Also, sort of part and parcel of that, those kinds of brands, HSBC, IBM, et cetera, can be global symbols. They can represent sort of modern, successful middle-class culture, and particularly if we're talking about emerging economies, I think that's a huge piece, that globalness actually becomes an asset. But I think alternatively, there's another game, and these aren't necessarily competitive, but there's entirely another game that is going deeply local. And that is sort of allowing the brand to develop indigenously, if you're a multinational company or not, in the culture itself. And there's an enormous number of, I think, examples in the developed world of that. I see in the developing world brands increasingly, whether they be owned locally or by multinationals, becoming increasingly successful. So I would, sort of the challenge I would put is that local strategies, the kind of betwixt and between strategies that are very much the norm today, don't, from the consumer's perspective, don't have as much value because they don't represent great economic power and success, nor are they really tailored for me.
Doug, I think one of the things I'd ask you to spill the beans on, because I sense that the gentleman to my right wouldn't spill the beans, at least if they had, and indeed the lady to my immediate left would not spill the beans on this. Let's talk about failure. Because, you know, I think sometimes you can work out how to succeed by looking at the way that people fail. Sure. Is there anything that you feel that strikes you that we might all be familiar with as being a completely failed branding strategy, particularly one in the area of taking a global brand and trying to insert it into a local marketplace?
Yeah. Well, let me, just to give you an example, the session had also sort of an emergent markets focus, so let me just give you an example of what I mean by this local strategies, betwixt and between strategies being not as agile in today's marketplace. I've spent a little bit of time in Latin America over the last few years, and I think you know, I'd rather be Michael Dell in Latin America, I think, than Michael White, because I think, you know, Dell, computers, hardware there's an economic proposition there. When you're dealing with soda, food, you're really dealing with culture, symbolism, taste, experience. And there, the traditional, sort of the conventional way of adapting, if you're a Coke or a Pepsi, has been to go in and sort of attach your brand to local cultural properties, by the, you know, the local football team, et cetera. And I think there, it is becoming increasingly hard for that strategy to work, because you have adept local competitors who are sort of outmaneuvering on the local level. So to take an example, in the carbonated soft drinks area, there's a brand called Cola Royale company, and a number of brands in Peru, now Mexico, that has launched a kind of price brand very adeptly against, Pepsi isn't a big player in these markets, but against Coca-Cola, has taken a 20% share by really understanding local distribution, local C&D markets, so this is you know, down market strategy, and has taken a huge chunk of share from Coke, and is also in Peru, and is also invading what is Coke's #1 market in terms of profitability in Mexico. So I think, you know, once upon a time, there were not local producers with the capital and sophistication to really localize well, but they're coming on now. And so the old kind of Coke strategy, or in Pepsi in the day, of kind of adapting a little bit by buying culture, I don't think is going to be so successful.
Well, Michael, I feel I have to give you the opportunity to come back on that. I mean, you did say earlier on, right at the start, that food and beverages are deeply cultural, and, you know, more than anywhere else, you have to familiarize yourself with the culture, as well as issues which Doug mentioned, like the distribution channels.
Yes. Well, I mean, Cola Royale is just a private label cola, so let's leave that aside for the moment. I think the fundamental premise that I was trying to lay out at the beginning is, I think with a brand, clearly, as Shelly said, you want to have clarity around the brand essence. You know, a brand is a promise. Consumers trust a brand. And you want to define that very clearly. What we do, for example, to, in effect, monitor the field is I get quarterly advertising reels, and I see them all. So if I see one I don't like, I pick up the phone. But to me, what's so rich about the world we now live in, and the technology changes, because it's more than the internet. I mean, it's even the way you produce advertising and what you can do digitally. It's mobile phones, frankly, more than the internet for us in emerging markets. There's 300 million people in China with mobile phones now. And what that enables you to do in localizing your brand, our consumer research is much more sophisticated than it ever was. In Brazil, for example, with Gatorade, which is one of our brands, we found that kind of the competitiveness of sports in the United States in our advertising didn't play as well. So we still built it around sports, but it was more around beach volleyball, and it was a little bit softer side of competition. that has worked very well for us in Brazil. So I think fundamentally, in the global world we live in, you can't ignore, and you do need to police your positioning, but at the same time, you will absolutely under-leverage your business model and your brand if you don't take local differences into account.
Michael Dell, do you want to make a comment on that?
You know, I'm leaning more towards a tighter frame in terms of the definition of what the brand promise is, and particularly when you get into sort of sub-segments of the market and sub-brands and how those are defined. And in our sector, that's fairly important because we have a variety of sub-brands that serve particular aspects of the market that are important. And if you have teams running off all over the world in different directions or defining the products very differently, we found that to be a really bad way to go. So we've defined it quite tightly, and in fact, you see this most clearly on the internet, where in fact the positioning is really much more of a global positioning. So if we have a very successful sub-brand called XPS, which is really an aspirational brand for the enthusiast computer user who wants absolutely the best, you know, the best there is. It has a very tight definition, and we don't want that to be changed, you know, and described differently in different markets. And that's worked very well for us. We've also seen where, you know, you sort of let it run free, and you end up with chaos, and the brand sort of starts to mean different things in different markets.
Well, I think Doug, just to pick up a point that he was making earlier, would say that is your privilege, if you like, because you're in a computer business. You're not so tied into the culture. You are asking people to step into what is really very much a global marketplace, a globalized culture, isn't it? If you like, the culture of the internet, the culture of state-of-the-art gaming, and so on.
Yeah, the culture comes once you start using the computer. I mean, yeah, there are uniquenesses. I mean, in Japan, there is a particular fondness for computers that are smaller, you know, and we see differences in design and color preference around the world that we certainly cater to. But
it's different, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you ask somebody in 100 countries, what's your favorite dish, you'll get 100 different answers. Sure. If you ask somebody, you know, what's your favorite game to play on a computer, you'd probably get only 20 different answers.
World of Warcraft is pretty popular pretty much wherever you go.
Right. Charles, just one other point I wanted to make is they're not mutually exclusive. Yeah. I mean, we have in our India business the #1 snack. It's a brand we developed called Kurkure. It's a lentil-based product. And the #1 potato chip called Lay's, which is a global brand. So, you know, I think it depends on the situation, what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm quite delighted with Kurkure. It's doing real well. And Lay's does fabulously well in India as well.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say that give an example of, you know, beyond technology of Dove soap, which I would argue competes locally. I mean, you've got to be able to compete locally. Now, it's the same premise. It's all about real beauty now, and it's caused quite a stir because women are speaking out everywhere about what they think real beauty is. But what a woman in India talks about, you know, the way they define real beauty is actually quite different from the way people in London, you know, people in the UK define real beauty. And so this is a global brand that has a very local, culturally relevant message, and competes right up against the local brands in every country. I would make one other observation, and I'm just starting to see this, and I think this is fascinating, and that is I think local brands everywhere are now aspiring to move from their geography and go broader. And it's really pretty amazing. I actually think in part it was sparked by the success of both Samsung and Hyundai, which were really Korean brands. And, you know, Korea was not the place that was supposed to be the home of global brands. They were very local brands that went global. And I think there are lots, I know, not think, There are lots of local brands right now, locally marketed brands in companies where there are conversations right now about, do you think we could go to an expanded geography? Do you think we could at least go out into our region? Is it possible that we could actually go global? Everyone's watching Lenovo. It's a brand that we're working on right now. Here's a Chinese brand that Michael knows well is going global. And so I think the lines, local, regional, global, they're all blurring, and it's making for a very interesting marketplace everywhere.
Let's throw this open to the floor. I know we'll have, I hope we'll have some very good questions from you. Who would like to start? The gentleman in the front here with the yellow tie. Just wait for the microphone. It's on its way.
Sohail Said from India. My question is, while brands may have a borderless world, so to speak, in addition to the cultural layerings, brands are also increasingly coming under threat from social platforms. You know what's happened to Pepsi and Coca-Cola thanks to activism in India. There are also brands like Fair and Lovely, which promoted by Unilever, are doing the most despicable service in India by promoting fairness and therefore making you marketable for marriage. How do you handle, in a global situation, brands that have to interplay with society on the one hand and then be responsible in providing, as Michael said, that enduring brand promise? How do you manage that paradox?
That's a terrific question, and I think an issue that increasingly we have to deal with every day, and particularly lifestyle, emotional brands like Pepsi. Our snacks brands can sometimes ride under the radar screen a little bit, to be honest. But when you're Pepsi or our competitor in Atlanta, you're a pretty easy target, frankly. And India was a great example where we had some challenges. And I think what's been clear to us, there's similarly been a movement on corporate social responsibility. And what's become clearer to us is, particularly in emerging markets, is you have to recognize that you're part of the community. And you have a responsibility not only to your shareholders, but if you want to protect the shareholders' investment, you've got a responsibility to the community. So in India, for example, in southern India, in Kerala, where there is a serious water shortage, we've probably got the most expertise, frankly, in the area on water. And all of our plants now are water neutral, so we collect rainwater to kind of recycle. In addition to that, we've gone out into the community, and one of the things we found was that people said the water had dried up, and the reason was they weren't digging their wells deep enough. So there's more that we're trying to do with the community. There are other things we're doing in India around seaweed cultivation with poor women in the south, creating a whole citrus industry with our Tropicana brand in the Punjab. But there's no question in my mind that the bar has been raised, and that if you want to be a global multinational company, you're absolutely right. You have to recognize some of the sensitivities locally, and you have to address them. You have to address them both in the way you market your brands and in the way you operate your company in that country.
Do you, in your advertising in India, make any allusion to the fact that you are being good corporate citizens by taking the actions that you described?
We don't in India, although I got an email this morning from Mexico that Sabritas, which is our snacks business, and Sabritas was just named one of the most socially responsible companies in Mexico. I'm not sure that we've done cause marketing. I'm not sure I see it that way, but I think you have to become known as a responsible company in the way you do business.
Okay. Let's take another question, unless one of the panel. Oh, Doug, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just throw in a little bit. Just to tell you a little bit about a study that we conducted when I was at Harvard a few years ago. Martin Sorrell was kind enough to fund, and so we were able to do some both qualitative and quantitative research around the world. The Research International conducted, and what we did is we tried to sort of parse out the dimensions of globalness that global brands, usually corporate brands, compete upon. And the idea was that once you're in the kind of global space, what Michael was talking about, sort of in the global public sphere, you're qualitatively different for both good and bad reasons. You're a big institution, people expect more of you, there's a higher risk factor, which can be a point of competitive advantage and certainly a risk. What we found was that far and away, the reputation, the economic reputation piece that we talked about earlier was the dominant piece. Global symbolism was important, but about 15% or so of the success of global brands fighting each other, competing with each other, were on citizenship, CSR kinds of behaviors, that people are actually making decisions, trading off these brands based on that. I would also add that when we sort of segmented global consumers, these sort of 800 consumers around the world, into different segments, and out of that came clear sort of global people who value global citizens, we called them, but there was a significant 13% of people actually devalued global brands because they're global. So this is a huge, again, opportunity or risk, but because the conversation is such a important one and all over the place today, this is something that people around the world are thinking about. It's not just Northern Europe. We found just as much CSR interest in China, in Egypt, in South Africa, in Brazil. So it's something I think that it's not just sort of a little side project, for some ethical officer, but it's a central strategic branding issue today.
Let's take another question. Gentleman here in the center.
Good morning. Bilgetis Lycra brand. Most global and strong brands are basically product-based. Dell computers, PepsiCo, Intel chips, product-based. There's more and more generic products coming to the market with ever-exceeding quality levels. Not only copying anymore, but also innovating. Do you see this as a threat? Do you see this as an opportunity? And in any case, what are you doing about it?
Do you want to start on that one, Michael?
You know, there's an ebb and flow in our business constantly of sort of larger brands that are consolidating share and emerging brands or really non-brands that are sort of, trying to grow. The overall direction has been pretty clear that there are some global brands that have been consolidating a lot of share through organic growth. Ours would be one of note, certainly. I think in our industry it might be a little different than other sectors because the product margins are really quite de minimis. So, smaller, let's say, non-branded firm would really not have a significant cost advantage or any cost advantage to speak of. So, what we're really doing is in our brand providing a message of value and excellent product and excellent service, and that has allowed us to grow. So, a big part of our growth has been actually making the products more affordable all over the world. And we think that's incredibly important given the nature of the ingredients that go into our product. The costs keep coming down. We can, as we bring the cost down, reach new markets. As we expand function, we can drive replacement, which brings more utility, more productivity, more entertainment, more healthcare, more education. So that's sort of a fundamental ingredient in just how the playing field is laid in our industry.
Shelley.
As you were asking the question, I was reminded of a study that was done a few years ago, which I actually found shocking, where they studied how long does it take in today's world for competition to replicate true functional advantage. So, the R&D guys are working for years and all that. The startling number, the average time is 6 months. It's 6 months, and in technology, it's much less, and in financial services, it's less than that. So the whole model of generic products that have any superiority at all, I'm sort of with I don't understand the economic model to those. And I actually think that excellent products that are branded in a way that people understand them and are consistent, seems to me that is the greatest barrier to competition a company can have these days, because the brand itself communicates all kinds of things that go beyond the functionality, and you amortize the value of that brand across a whole array of products. It just seems to me that that's the most efficient model. I think, I often think that companies should aspire to sort of the American Express place, where when American Express goes out, when you go out and talk to American Express card members, they will actually say to you across almost any category, not food, I don't think, and I'm not sure about computers, but all other things being equal, I just as soon do business with American Express. Now, to have a cohort of consumers around the world, of people around the world who have now expressed a preference to do business with your corporate brand, this allows you now to build a business underneath that brand that is remarkable. So, rather than worrying about the generics so much, I would almost think that the generics need to be thinking about if they have true advantage and quality, they should be branding that.
Indeed, there are generic companies who've moved in this direction, I believe, aren't there?
I think that's right. I mean, it's... I
think possibly even almost something like Samsung has moved in that direction.
Yes,
from
it has,
almost
yes.
being
Yeah.
a generic in the as seen from the global perspective, is now, as you say, a sharply branded product,
right, yes.
series of products.
But I mean, because the economic model is just superior. It just is.
Okay, let's take another question. Lady here.
My name is Ilona Kickbush. I'm a global health consultant. I'd be interested to hear from you if you have a great brand, but the view of your product changes because of social and other changes, the global obesity epidemic, for example, and suddenly a product that everybody thought was reasonably benign is being seen as, you know, the absolute dangerous thing close to cigarettes. So how do you deal with that as a company, and how do you actually perhaps benefit from the greater social interest in health?
That's a great question. There is no debate. There is an enormous obesity challenge globally. It's interpreted in different cultures in very different ways. I mean, it is viewed differently in China about artificials, whereas it's in the UK at the moment it's sodium. I mean, so you have to be a little careful. There's not really a one-size-fits-all way to address it. But what we recognized was that the world had changed, and for us as a food and beverage company, we had a responsibility to step up and try and address the issue. Quite honestly, I don't see our products in the same light. I mean, I went to work for PepsiCo in 1990 and never thought I was going to work for a tobacco company, so I don't quite see it that way. But that issue is out there, and so what we've tried to do is a whole range of programs. For example, we created a Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee for our corporation of outside medical doctors to counsel us on nutrition. We've had to get a lot smarter about the nutritional content of our products. We are working harder to offer more choice. For example, in the UK, I think next month we're relaunching brand Walker's, our potato chip, with 25% less sodium and 50% less saturated fat. Our whole R&D focus has changed much more towards looking at lower fat, lower sugar, lower sodium type products. Now, it's not that easy, so it's going to take time, in some cases years, for us to continue the breakthrough. But I guess I believe the way you address it is, first and foremost, you've got to step up, recognize that it's an issue and that you've got a responsibility to address it. On the other hand, it's important for people to understand that the biggest part of the problem is actually not the calories people are consuming. It's actually the lack of exercise that they've been getting over the last 50 years. So you need both. I mean, you need to address calories in and calories out in a holistic way. And lastly, frankly, we think it's an opportunity. I mean, we think finding great tasting, lower fat, lower sodium, lower sugar, lower calorie, whatever, is an enormous opportunity for us. Our water business in the U.S. is flying. Aquafina. In other markets around the world, we've found opportunities with Pepsi Max, which is a no sugar. Tropicana is ours, orange juice. So we believe in choice, and we believe in ensuring that consumers have a range of choices. Quaker oatmeal is ours as well, which is probably one of the best things you can have for breakfast in the morning. But it does require us to change our priorities, and it has internally.
So, could come back to you actually, because I think it's an I think you raise a very interesting question. What do you think of the answer?
Well, I think first of all, it redefines corporate social responsibility, which initially was seen more as to, how one works in a country, working conditions, et cetera, safety of people, etc. And suddenly the product itself becomes part of corporate social responsibility. And I think you partly address that. That means, you have to revisit your product and then actually take the opportunity, because as far as I understand, I'm not in this business, but health is becoming one of the largest businesses. And I think, if the very companies that are now under pressure because they do contribute to certain problems, it's not just an individual problem, it is because of the brands, it's a lifestyle issue. You want to drink whatever because it symbolizes something. That's what branding is about. And therefore, finding that balance, I think, is a significant challenge. And I mean, being in the health business, in terms of public health, I think if, the very companies that are part of the problem become part of the solution, I think, that's actually the way to go. And people seem to be willing to pay for health. So,
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take another question. Over there, in the red jacket. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Linda Nichols, and I'm with the Post Office in Australia. I wanted to make a brief comment, firstly, on the first question that was raised about generics, and then ask a question about brand. The comment I'd make about generics from our experience in Australia is that in very heavily regulated industries, generics have much better opportunities to take on established brands. An example I would give is, for example, in the airline business, you can be called anything, and if your price is cheap enough, the traveling public believes that airline safety regulations are such that your airline must be safe too. I think that's also true in the pharmaceutical industry. Certainly in Australia, people have no qualms about purchasing generic pharmaceuticals, simply because they know that the regulation of that industry is so tight, the product will be as good, if not identical to, the more expensive branded version. So that was the comment I wanted to make. My question is about when you have to change your name or change your brand, expand your market, or indeed go global. And the three examples I'd toss out for illustration or comment. The post office in Australia is called Australia Post. That's a tough brand to take out of the country. Okay? But I don't think we're alone in that. Lucky Group in Korea changed its name to LG, Life's Good, which seemed to me a fascinating transformation. And then, of course, we have Kentucky Fried Chicken, who, when fried became so tedious, went to KFC. So could I ask the panel to comment on when you have to change your name to make it?
Well,
I'll start with you, Shelly, if I may.
I think it's the strategy of last resort. I mean, I think because it's not because it's really expensive. But I think the examples you give are valid ones. I mean, to me, you don't start a second brand or change a brand unless you absolutely have to. But there are times when the direction you want to go in, some few times, that where the brand just can't, for what it stands for, just can't handle the new direction. I mean, the classic example, I think, is when Disney decided to do R-rated films, and they couldn't put the Disney name on it, so they went to Touchstone. I mean, that to me is a moment where it makes perfect sense. But my sense is that I think companies do it too fast and too often without thinking about, is it possible? Could you take, could you go back and find out figure out how to take the essence of what the brand is and move it a little bit and make it, you know, accommodate what your new product line is. But if it doesn't, if it can't move, then move.
Well, Michael Dell, you were born with a name, which is a brand.
And I'm not going to change
anything.
it.
You know, if you'd had some long, complicated name, that wouldn't have worked.
That's true.
You were very lucky to be born with that name, and I suspect that your company is going to keep it and only change it over your, literally over your dead body.
It's probably true. Yeah. We're not changing our name.
Michael White.
I probably don't have anything to add about changing brands. I go back to the B brand challenge, though. I mean, there's no question that there are more and more kind of commoditization of products out there. Competition has never been tougher. But I think what that means for us is really what we're supposed to do, which is first, you've got to constantly innovate around your product. Second, and something we don't talk a lot about, is you've got to innovate with your business system model, and particularly in emerging markets. Sometimes I think our success is more driven by our business model, our ability to make quality potatoes, working with farmers in order to turn them into potato chips that are consistently high quality with proprietary seed and so on and so forth. You build that advantage into the business model. And lastly, you know, a brand is about passion and relevance, and you've got to continue to differentiate, and I call it relevate, make your brand more relevant in the hearts and minds of consumers every year. You can't take anything for granted in this business anymore.
Is there anyone out in the audience who has experience or strong feelings about changing names? Maybe does anyone have a company that has changed or a brand that has changed its name for whatever reason that you could share with us? Or indeed, maybe have you decided not to change your name? Yep, gentleman over there, yes. George Colony.
Dell actually did not start with the name Dell Computers. So Michael, I want to ask you the question, why did you change the name?
Yeah, you're it's only partially correct. The name of the corporation when it was founded was Dell. The trade name of the company was PCs Limited, which sounded like a good name to me at the time. And then we went to open in the UK. And of course, you can't be PCs Limited because that makes absolutely no sense at all. You know? Or PCs even more limited or something. That just totally. And so the UK business, as it was starting up, was sort of telling the headquarters, well, hey, you guys need to give us an answer because we need something to call this company because we're going to like start selling computers. And we were so busy back in Austin, we didn't really have an answer for them. And they said, well, since you don't know what to do, we're just going to call it Dell because that's the name of the company. And then a few months later, we were about to go public, and so we decided to change the name, the brand name, back to the corporate name. But in actuality, I never intended for the brand name of the company to be my name. So it was, you know.
Will you prevail upon? Did you take a lot of persuasion?
I wasn't particularly excited about the idea at the time. I think it's all worked out okay.
Was that your natural was that your natural modesty?
Well, actually, the story even goes a little further. Before the company was incorporated, I had this PCs Limited trade name, and then our lawyer who went to go set up the corporation said, well, you can't have that as a corporation name because it's too generic. And he said, and I had to file the papers, so I just called it Dell Computer. And so actually a lawyer came up with the name. And I didn't even think about it because we were trading as PCs Limited. So we sort of backed into this. So that's exactly how this brand was created.
Let me take another question. There was a gentleman just here, and second row back. I know that I shortchanged you earlier on.
That's okay. I'm Rick Warren, author of Purpose Driven Life, which has become a brand. I want to go back to Shelly's question at the start when she said, what do you do when an employee violates the brand? You know, maybe overseas, they kind of try to change it a little bit, or even an outsider tries to redefine your brand. And another question, you can pick either one, is what factors do you think make cause branding succeed or fail? What advice would you give to nonprofits?
Well, on the first part, it's sort of, I mean, employees sort of, you know, people trying to make the brand bigger, more interesting, trying to, I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's actually to be applauded. Experimentation is good, and in the world in which we live, you know, sometimes somebody does something that's just is a little different, and the rest of the world looks at it and goes, you know, that's a pretty good thing to do. I think what I was talking about before is where there's a true violation of what the brand stands for, and it's at that point, you know, that you have to make a decision and just not allow it to go forward. You know, what makes for a successful brand? I mean, you know, it just sort of brands compress data better than anything else. You know, a great brand makes you simultaneously, when I say it, makes you feel something, think something, see something, hear something, see a color, imagine the users, think about what the company looks like. I mean, everything that a company does defines the brand, helps to define the brand. So I think what makes a successful brand is that consistency of making sure that what the brand essence is all about is expressed at in a consistent way at every single point of contact, you know, with every constituent. I'm now very focused on lobbies. I think the headquarters lobbies say a lot about a brand. You know, it's sort of your employees, your customers, everybody you care about a lot probably walks through those walls. And most of them, to me, look like generic airport lounges. You know, so to me, down to the lobby, is your brand expressed in a way that's consistent with what that brand stands for?
Does that make sense to you, Doug Holt? Have you done academic research on the value of having a respectable and impressive lobby?
No, not respectable. No, brand consistency.
Brand consistency.
Sometimes it's actually tacky. So, yeah, but okay.
Yeah, well, certainly everything the brand does. I mean, the metaphor I like is that a brand, the company is an author of the brand. It's not. I don't think you want to get into the trap of controlling the meaning of the brand, because the brand exists out in society, exists out in culture. A lot of people are contributing to it. Consumers are contributing it. The media is contributing it. It's something that if you try and control, you're going to ruin it, I think. But if you think you're an author moving it in a strategic direction and a cultural direction you want, I think that's a wise sort of way to think about it. And certainly, as Shelly points out, it's not just advertising. It's every touch point can be an expression. To go back to the Coloreal example, Coloreal isn't a private label brand in Peru for the simple reason that they have a distribution system where guys from the barrios come and pick up Coloreal and distribute it all over. And because people see these guys on the street instead of the big professional van, it's created an idea of populism around this brand without any, you know, big media spending. So another example of distribution systems. Snapple in the day used mom and pop, created meaning for the brand. So certainly that's true. On the consistency issue, however, I'd beg to differ. I wrote a book arguing exactly against this point, that for certain brands, if I were Dell again, consistency is critical. If it's about economic, you know, reputation sort of effects. If you're talking about culture, culture moves, society changes. In the brands that I've tracked, including, you know, Mountain Dew that Pepsi has done an amazing job with in the US, has been successful simply because it has changed and reinvented itself vigorously as American society has changed. So I think, again, you have to separate. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. If you're doing certain kinds of brand drivers, economic reputation, trust, you're a bank, consistency is great. If you're playing symbolism and you keep the same symbolism for years and years, you become, you know, it becomes nostalgia and it becomes dead if you stay in the same place.
Let's take another question. Gentleman here. Blue shirt.
Hi, I'm Bob Forbes with Forbes. And one observation, we just made a brand change last week. For 15 years, we've been publishing a magazine called FYI, our lifestyle supplement to Forbes. We have new media out there. So we've just changed it to Forbes Life. We're branding it under the magazine, a section in Forbes magazine itself, and on our .com site. Question for Shelly. There's an awful lot of new media out there. How do we go about entertaining all those different media, handling them, changing our attitudes towards them?
Who's we?
Perhaps the two Michaels. Anybody trying to get out?
You mean the CEOs and owners, CEOs, marketers, and all that? I mean,
sure. How do you handle all this new media?
I think it's a celebration. I think it's fantastic that we have so many new ways that we can communicate with all our publics, and I think that you just have to recognize that in today's world, different people are going to access your content and information in the ways they choose to. And so you have to put it out there I think in ways that people can make their own choices about how to access them. But I think that the days of we have a media plan that's 2 television commercials and 3 print ads that you use in 4 different, vehicles. Those days are over. I mean, these days, the media plan is the most creative part of any presentation. Sort of where you do it helps define who the brand, helps define the brand, frankly.
Yeah, I would just add a comment. I mean, I am enormously excited about these new media because as a company that sells directly to the customer, we can target subsegments of the market in a very precise way. We've always had an ability to measure which media and which, particular instances and even down to the number of times and where it's placed and at a very scientific level. So as you can subsegment that even further by customer, by product, it's incredibly powerful for us. So that brings a whole nother dimension of capability in terms of being able to target customers.
It's a new dimension, but I suspect that it's a new dimension which is limited only to those highly sophisticated marketplaces in which a large number of people are online. This presumably is a revolution which is going to evolve. It's a revolution which is going to happen fast in your business, but which is going to happen much more slowly in your business.
I disagree. In India this year, we've got an Oi Bubbly campaign for Pepsi. It's a terrific campaign, very local in the way it was designed. But one of the keys is downloading ringtones to mobiles. We will download 1 million ringtones of the jingle from the ad to mobiles in India. And similarly, by the way, we've got a similar program but a different ad execution in China. So it tends to be more mobile than internet yet because the penetration of internet isn't quite there. But I agree with Shelly. I mean, to me, you can look at it as a threat or an opportunity. When you're number one, and our competitor tends to spend a lot of money buying the Olympics and whatever else, this is a wonderful world to be in as a competitor because, we can do campaigns like nothing official about it and people think we sponsored the World Cup. And I suspect we'll do pretty well. I saw some advertising that we're going to show this summer on Friday. And in this whole area of technology, it isn't just about the media. We're able to shoot an ad with Christina Aguilera and then cut in a duet with a local celebrity in the Middle East. We also kind of cut one in for China, another one for India, so that we can do kind of the best of global and local. The digital ability of what you can do now enables you to customize and personalize stuff or tailor it locally. And to me, that's where you're going to get the maximum, really, resonance with local consumers. You got to touch the heart.
Let's take another question. In the front row here.
Hi, I'm Madhavi from ICICI Bank in India. Kelly referred to local brands going global. And I just wanted to know what the panel thinks that Samsung and Hyundai did right, and perhaps some of the less successful brands did wrong as they went along that path.
Well, Shelly, you mentioned mine.
Yeah, I mean, well, one thing is that they had terrific product. I mean, Samsung went out and they had these products. They made products that made people's heads turn. I mean, as a start, and Hyundai designed and developed attractive cars that were of great value. And then they put forth a compelling brand story. The other thing I would say that they did is they spent behind it. You know, it's really, I said this before, it's really, really expensive to push a brand globally. It just because, you know, of the cost involved. And Samsung, I believe the number I heard, committed $500 million the year that they decided to market their brand globally. So it's a huge commitment. You got to make sure what you're doing is right. You got to make sure you got the stuff, you know, the product and the story. And then you have to aggressively spend behind it. You have to believe, you have to be passionate, you have to be committed, and you got to go.
Let's take another question. Gentleman there, third row back.
I'm Shekhar Bajaj from India. I have a family brand, same as Michael Dell. Now, the question is that one, you have a Pepsi brand, and one, you have a Dell brand. Tomorrow, for some reason, which I don't think is at this moment under consideration, but if Dell decides to sell under acquisition to somebody, what would happen to the brand? Because it's a family brand. Person may say, sorry, I'm not giving away the Dell brand. And the total equity or total strength of the brand is what gives the premium. So if there's no Dell brand and you say, I'm going to only give you the network, you may get maybe 50% even less value for that particular acquisition. So how would you look at it, Michael Dell? And even Michael White can add if he likes, or even Shelly. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a real easy one for us because we're not gonna do that. So, but I think you raise an interesting point because certainly in our industry and in a lot of industries, a lot of value is destroyed in these sort of transformational mergers, if you will. And the brands are lost and confused, and we've been more of a beneficiary of those sort of things in our industry. And I think that's a big risk in you know, large mergers. So our strategy is not to do that.
I just comment on it from a PepsiCo standpoint. I think our net assets on the balance sheet are about $10 billion. Our market cap is $100 billion. That's what Shelly's talking about. The $90 billion is the value of our brands. So when we're looking at acquisitions, for the most part, unless it's a small potato chip company where I can bring value, I can upgrade the quality, and I can convert the brand to Lay's, we look pretty carefully because most of what you pay for is goodwill or the brand.
What about your people?
And the people as well.
I mean, they've got to be in that 90 billion somewhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, it's a workforce, it's a franchise, it's a distribution system, it's people sitting in offices.
No question. I mean, it's the assets that aren't on the balance sheet. It's your talent and it's your brands. It's your intellectual capital, if you will. Roger Enrico used to say we had, you know, 90% of the intellectual capital on potato chips in the world.
It's a combination of all those things, but the value of a powerful global brand when entering new markets or new categories just cannot be underestimated. I mean, we have plenty of competitors out there who are sort of single country or single product type companies, and they just don't get the traction that you get with a strong global footprint.
Doug, I'm interested in this because we're talking about mergers. And I can think of one industry, which is the financial services industry, which has seen an enormous amount of consolidation, and enormous numbers of quite familiar names have gone under or subsumed or essentially added to an existing name and then quietly dropped. There's a tremendous amount of destruction of brand value there, or not?
I know very little about that question. Can I try and sidestep that and address the family brand one? Would that be all right?
Okay, please do.
Yeah, I'm really not a pro at those kinds of issues. But I think, I mean, it gets a similar question, I think, when you think particularly about names, people's names being part of the brand. And I think, again, it goes back to a question of what is the brand out in society. And there are brands whose founder's name is on, at the head, Dell being one of them, where I think probably the brand has superseded Michael Dell, not to take anything away from you, but I think the brand stands for something much more. You can think of many other examples where a family brand, it doesn't even need to be a family brand, a founder's brand. It can be an artist that's associated with a brand. Look in the fashion world, Coco Chanel or Ralph Lauren or somebody like that. Steve Jobs, I think, even though his name isn't on the header of Apple, I think he, as a person, is a key part of the brand. So I think the question comes down to where is the value in the brand? If it's just a family name that has come to stand for economic value, the family goes away, the family brand goes away, it's less important. If you have somebody like Steve Jobs who's very much woven into the brand, the person becomes much more critical. So I think, just to shift your question around a little bit, my interest would be sort of how the family is sort of woven into the understanding of the brand in India. Is actually kind of critical. And if you are part of the brand, it's something that becomes very consequential in an M&A sort of deal.
So another question?
Well, I was going to add
very quickly, Les.
No, I was going to answer the financial services question just to make a different point. In my experience, there's sometimes a difference between the way companies evaluate their brands and the way the world does. We all say brands live in the hearts and minds of the people who use them. And I've been in situations where their acquisitions have been made and the owner of the company being acquired tells everybody what a remarkable brand they have, and you go out to the marketplace and you talk to the real people who are using that brand, and it turns out that most of those people could care less, actually. And so, again, because brands are so expensive, if there really isn't real brand value as evidenced by how people in the real marketplace feel, then you might as well just consolidate. And I think that's a lot of what's been happening in financial services. The people who go to a particular bank, they don't actually care that much. And if they don't care that much that that brand's going to disappear, then you might as well have it disappear.
Let's have another couple of questions. Gentleman here in the center.
Thanks. Bruce Sewell with Intel. I'd like to come back to this new media question. I think there's a fascinating issue in here. To preface the question, though, I'm defining new media now in the sense of what one might call Internet 3.0. This notion that the content creators and the opinion shapers have moved from the corporate to the individual. If you think of sites like Wikipedia, the blogging phenomenon, these are a new breed, I think, of decision makers and decision shapers. And my question is, does the paradigm need to change? If the paradigm to date has been more of a push, taking up this concept of authoring the brand, to what extent should a large company, or even a small company, be trying to influence directly these individual voices, these voices that have resonance in their own community, in part because they are individuals, and because they are not being paid by or being directly influenced by the brands? So does this require a new paradigm?
Let's spin that forward, because I think one of the themes we wanted to explore, which maybe we haven't done so far, is looking forward 10 years. How are we going to be approaching some of these issues in 10 years' time? Michael, can I ask you to respond to that?
I absolutely believe that that's a huge force. I mean, you've got blogs, you've got sites of very influential users or groups that sort of set up and say, okay, we're going to talk all about a very specific topic, and that becomes sort of the place that anybody who knows anything about that likes to go and share information. Those are massively important, and at the sort of real inflection point of influence, those sites can be way more important than the traditional, editors and the sort of old media guys, right? So I absolutely believe that that's very important. So you've got to find ways to reach out to those folks, identify them, and work with them, even though they may or may not want to talk to you. But our experience has been that if you actually reach out to them, they're thrilled. you know, and they'd love to talk to you, and they like the opportunity just to have a dialogue and engage. So it's, you know, very important new aspect of marketing.
Could we take a couple more questions? Maybe on this theme of the future, gentleman there in the front row on the.
Jerry Roach, New York, Heidrick and Struggles. You want to talk about changing names? I just wonder if there isn't a little too much, being a contrarian, maybe having to be defensive about the name Heidrick and Struggles. We do search work. I'm thinking that sometimes the emphasis on the brand carrying the product and carrying the service could be overdone. I think Michael White of Pepsi, the job that you guys are doing cleaning the clock of Coke, and I just read last week, that Coke has the #1 brand in the world, and yet it isn't saving them from Pepsi doing a number on them. Along with a few years ago, if you remember, Don Quijote coming out with the new Coca-Cola, and within a couple of weeks had to change it back to Coke Classic and try to recoup that. The Coke brand didn't save that marketing strategy, and I would counsel, as far as I see it, that the emphasis on the brand as carrying the product should be reversed. The product and the service should carry the brand and ultimately makes the brand. I'd be interested in hearing someone address that contrarian view.
Let's hear briefly from Michael White and then Michael Dell, if we may, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I've always said a brand is necessary but not sufficient, and I think it starts with the product, as Shelly said. Second, you know, building the brand. But the third, I've come to really believe in international, and especially in emerging markets, it's often as much about your business model, your superior business system like Michael's built. In our case, in India, if you look at the way we go from the fields to the farms to the, you know, potatoes, seed, distribution, manufacturing, all the way through, it is the power of the entire business system model as well that's critical. And I think it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a great brand is not a substitute for a winning business model. You know, there are some really great brands that have been built in the last, you know, few years. In fact, one was mentioned on this panel that cost a lot of money to build and are powerful brands, but actually don't generate any profit for the companies that have built them, at least not yet. So, you know, what one has to be cautious here about just equating the growth of a brand with the success of a business.
Okay, let's have one absolute last question. Gentleman over here.
Rick Goings, Tupperware. Michael White, question. Michael, it seems to me the decade and a half you've been now with PepsiCo, prior to that, the competitive framework at Pepsi versus Coke started with product differentiation, the taste challenge, back and forth. And then it was, how do you claw away at their distribution? And coming off what Jerry was saying, what have you used as this arsenal to really chip away at Coke? Because it seems like you're playing the game a different way today.
Well, I think, you know, I think that really we had our comeuppance in 1996. I happened to be CFO at the time and took an $800 million write-off to our board of directors, and that, as a way of teaching you lessons you never forget. But when I think back on the last 10 years in our company, I think there are a couple of things that are key. First, we stayed close to the consumer. As the consumer has changed, we said we were going to be a total beverage company long before our competitor ever thought about it. So waters, teas, juice drinks, we acquired Tropicana, we acquired Gatorade. We remade the company in that sense to stay close to consumer trends, and I think that's always first. Consumers are always changing, as Doug said. Culture's changing. You've got to stay relevant with consumers. I think the second thing is people. Really, we have invested since Andy Pearson was under Don Kendall in talent in PepsiCo. It's an integral part of the way we run our business and our business models. and that's made an enormous difference for us. And I think really third is focus. I mean, when we refocused our business in 1996, we said we were going to go after certain markets. We were going to play in certain ways, and that's been pretty successful for us. But I was there when Roger was, I was his CFO when he was on our competitor's bottle on the cover of Fortune, and it's nice to see that they seem this month to have recognized maybe that wasn't a particularly smart thing to do. But, you can't get arrogant. I mean, the consumer's always changing. The competition's always getting tougher. You cannot take anything for granted in business these days.
I find that a very good point to end, but I think I'm just going to ask Doug Holt to put an academic gloss on all of that. We've had a very, very interesting time over the last hour and a quarter. I know we're into extra time, injury time, extra injury time. But Doug Holt, one or two points that maybe you've learnt in the course of our discussions over the last hour and a quarter.
You want me to ruin the whole
No,
session?
I don't want a summary, but...
Well, just pushing to the future, I think that's, we gave a little bit short shrift to that, but I think that's the consummate challenge for people who run global brands. And I think a couple of the points also from the audience that came up that are really important. One is this idea of new media and communities aggregating around brands, and so what is the effect of that? And both in sort of increasing transparency, but also, as I'm sure certainly Dell and Pepsi learned, consumers start taking ownership of brands in different ways. So we celebrate them for being acolytes, but also they want more control. So I would say there's sort of a collaborative model of branding that has to emerge out of that. It's also one that I think the first phase of this, I think, in the mid-late 90s, marketers responded by trying to control these new channels and doing a lot of stealth stuff, and I think there's a lot of reaction against that. So transparency, I think, becomes really, really important. So what is marketing in this kind of new era? Transparency, collaboration, what do you have to do? I think it's sort of, one is back to the nuts and bolts, good economic value. We talked about Samsung, we talked about emerging brands in developing countries and how do they compete, and it's making the better product for the best price is one piece. But I would say another one that really gets lost along the way, and particularly I feel for the ad business today, is, especially given the theme of this conference is around creativity, is that in the pressures on the marketing budget, marketing spend, and sort of quantifying that, the idea of brands being creative, being artistic, being a part of culture has been lost. And I would suspect that is going to be an increasingly important piece to differentiate in the coming years. So I would encourage all of you clients out there to celebrate the creativity of your ad agencies rather than watch how many hours they spend on their ads.
Professor Doug Holt, Saïd Business School, Oxford. Shelly Lazarus, CEO of O&M. Michael Dell. Michael White at PepsiCo. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you all. And enjoy your day in Davos. Thanks for your attention.